I was always just thinking that this is a people story. It was less about how things are made, and I guess there's a lot about how things are made, but it was really more the human journey of innovation and what were the challenges that people were posed with and how did they solve them. So it really wasn't meant to be like a big technical story. It was more of a human story.
That is filmmaker Leslie Iwerks talking about the incredible Disney Plus series, The Imagineering Story. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks for joining me here on episode 102 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. I hope that you're all staying healthy, being safe, and also finding ways to relax and reduce stress, which I know has been a challenge for me, just given everything that's happening in our world today. One good way that I've found to just take a moment is through art and doing things I enjoy and learning more about them. And a perfect way to do that with theme parks is a show like The Imagineering Story, which premiered on Disney Plus in November. This series, though, I know is coming to Europe now more recently. And I've watched a lot of promotional specials and Travel Channel, Discovery Channel, all of those shows, plus some Disney official souvenir videos. And given all that, I went in a little bit cautious about the Imagineering Story, even though Leslie Iwerks had done a great job with the Pixar Story and other documentaries. I wondered what it would be like. And I was blown away by it. There were for so many reasons. One, it just had so many interesting people, and we learned stories that I didn't know about Imagineers and about attractions. It was gorgeous to look at, and it was able to encapsulate so much history into 6 episodes and also leave me feeling like there were so many more stories that could be covered. And that made me so excited to get the chance to talk to Leslie Iwerks, who is the director of the series. And she found a way to create something that is great for hardcore fans, but also works for people that aren't as familiar with the parks. So it was a real treat to get a chance to talk with her. And I know our time was pretty limited. I know that Leslie's schedule is very busy, so I appreciate that she took the time to talk with me and give a little background about the show and some of the big moments. And I hope that I get a chance to talk with her again, because I would love to dig a lot further into the Imagineering Story in the future. I know that a lot of you out there really like this show, so I hope you enjoy this podcast, which was a lot of fun for me to do. Here is Leslie Iwerks. Let's start with the Imagineering Story, which I know was a project that's been going on for a long time. How did you ultimately get involved with directing this series?
I screened my documentary on Pixar called the Pixar Story at Imagineering for the employees, for the Imagineers there at one point. And Marty Sklar was in attendance, and he actually invited me to come screen it and said, when are you going to do the Imagineering Story? And I said, well, you tell me. I don't know. So that was kind of how it started. And then, we met and discussed what the story could be, and it went from there.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I mean, it seems so natural now that I've seen it, how it kind of came together. But, I mean, you're trying to cover basically, just going back to the opening of Disneyland, 65 years of history. So how did you go about kind of carving out the key stories within that? Because I feel like it could be just so much trying to narrow it down even to 6 hours.
It was hard. We had over 200 interviews that we did that were new. We had, hundreds of archival interviews. The amount of B-roll and old footage that we found through Imagineering and the parks was pretty overwhelming, but it was, it was a process. It was originally the documentary was commissioned as a 90-minute film. And then as we started filming we just got so much material that we felt like we should just give it its due and edit it the way it feels natural and develop out some of these stories. And then it turned out it was 6-hour cut. And that was a little scary because we weren't sure whether Disney would be open to a 6-hour edit. But then Disney Plus came along and then we had a home. So it was like a synergy of perfect timing.
Yeah. And you mentioned the footage too, because I've seen a lot of documentaries and promotional materials about the parks, and there were so many things that I had not seen. I mean, you had like the pirates on the back of the bus or on the back of the truck, and so many other kind of random fun moments. Like, what was that research project like? I mean, the process of just finding that information and then somehow narrowing that down to something that could be in a documentary series.
I mean, it's not easy. There was so much gold in there that it was hard to not include a lot of stuff. Let me put it that way. There's a lot left on the cutting room floor. But, it was just finding the best stuff and distilling it down to the most unique and interesting and imagery and shots that people hadn't seen before or had seen, but we were able to get like really high res transfers. And so you're seeing it at such a high resolution now that felt different, even if you might have seen some of these clips before. So my whole goal from the very beginning was to take audiences into Imagineering from the beginning and really feel like you're living inside this world and you're getting to know these people and you're going through the same challenges they are and you're just getting to understand the parks from a human standpoint, almost like the parks are a character and you're getting to understand the people who built that character. I've done a lot of films on companies, entrepreneurial stories like Industrial Light and Magic, Pixar, Hearst, Ella Brennan, and with each of these Commander's Palace. So each of these institutions that are world renowned, that people think of as a brand, I think I've been able to distill those brands down into human stories and give them a beating heart and allow viewers to see that company now in a different way. And I think the same thing for the parks is like we experience the parks, but we don't necessarily know the stories behind how they were done or the people that built them.
Totally, yeah. And there's so many people involved with this, much beyond just the kind of typical people you would see. I mean, you mentioned the human stories. I love the scene in episode 1 with Bob Gurr kind of in the inner sanctum of the Matterhorn. I'd wonder if you could talk a little bit about shooting that moment and just kind of how that came together, because it was obviously very moving for him, just the whole experience.
Yeah, and I've known Bob a long time. He knew my grandfather very well, and my grandfather actually got him a job at Disney, and he's been in our kind of a family vortex, so to speak, and for all my life. And Bob's such an easygoing guy. And so to me, it was like, okay, Bob, I just call him up. Would you want to come to the park and we're going to get some more footage of you? And would you be open to going inside the Matterhorn and shooting some hoops with me? And he's like, sure, no problem, whatever you want. So, we filmed that day of him. Actually, we had other footage of him riding around on the Utopia cars, other things that we never included, but that going inside the Matterhorn was fun, and I knew that it was pulling viewers into a world, into a place they've never been. And so that was very fun. In fact, when we were shooting it, we had a pretty decent sized crew and we had to be very organized and very nimble, because they had to stop the ride for us to cross over the ride platform, the track into the Matterhorn. So we had to shoot that shot and then kind of do a number of steps to get them in. And then, going up the elevator and out of the elevator. And so there were a lot of little setups, but, once we kind of got in there, it was fun to sort of shoot that reveal and then have him try to shoot hoops. and it was just sweet. I mean, it was, I don't know if there's another word for it, except it was just a sweet moment that I knew was kind of going to be cool for people to see. And then, I hadn't really thought about the autographs on the wall until when we'd done our scout, we had scouted all these locations at the parks. Every time we were at different parks, we'd scout places where we could do interviews. And so we were always trying to find the most unique spots. And being inside the Matterhorn is very weird. Like, it sounds kind of eerie. You're hearing the sounds of the coasters and reverberation almost, and distance, and all over the place. Like, it's all around you. And then you're hearing the distant sound of the roar of the abominable snowman or whatever his character is, and it's kind of creaky, and, it's just kind of weird, right? But yet it's very industrial in there, and it's just, it feels like it's got the smell of kind of this old place that has been around with a lot of stories to it, and not many people that get to go in there. And so there's this teeny little elevator you go in that you can fit like 3 people, 4 people, and you hope it works. And you know what I mean? And you get up there, and then, you see all these signatures, and that's where a lot of the cast members would go and wait around, or the mountain climbers would come up and have to wait and shoot hoops up there until their shift, to go back down and climb back down the Matterhorn. So you just kind of got a sense of what, interesting history there must have been in that little space, and how people would sign their name. And so it kind of occurred to me, like, on that day, in that moment of like, Bob, why don't you, why haven't you signed this? It seemed odd to me that he hadn't. And so that was how that scene came about.
Yeah, and it works on multiple levels, because in one sense I'm watching it going, wow, it's behind the scenes of the Matterhorn, but then the things with Bob Gurr are so interesting. So it's kind of both ends of it, where you're seeing something new, but then also having, like you mentioned, a sweet moment. So you mentioned your family, and that's something that I find really interesting, is you have a close connection to Disney, obviously through your father, Don Iwerks, and then your grandfather, Ub Iwerks, who worked directly with Walt in the early days of the company. So growing up, I mean, you talk about how that impacted the way you look at Disney, and then even how you approach this, because you have such an interesting, unique background through your family.
Yeah, it was a fun way to grow up. I didn't really think it would be so special. I should say I was a little older, and then realized, wow, this is a cool perspective to have, and an access that not many kids have to behind the scenes at the studio and the parks and whatnot. So that was fun. And I think it sort of opened my eyes to the making of Disneyland and the parks and the way things work, and the backstage lots at the studio and how movies are made. And just my dad always sort of being on the other side of making films and creating camera systems, and all that was an interesting way to grow up and a perspective.
Well, yeah, because you grew up and it was just kind of part of the family and what it was, not realizing that it was obviously not something most of us would had. In general, I mean, also part of the shooting that you did is you got to see, as the parks were coming together, because it was such a long-term project, like Shanghai Disneyland, for example, you're not only seeing the history, you're seeing what's being constructed now. So what was that like to kind of see a new park kind of coming together, walking through the dirt and actually experiencing it while you're creating the show?
It was wild, because I think, I guess the idea that you're able to witness a park, grow from concept to completion, from dirt to full park, standing tall with the castle and everything else, that was a fascinating look at just how to build a city, right? How to build a entertainment infrastructure. And so that was fascinating. I mean, I could not believe the pressure that these guys were under, these gals and guys were under for 5 years in creating this. And I think one of the biggest things that was a takeaway was, like, Doris Woodward, sort of following her for a day or part of a day in that scene with the stained glass cutters, doing these very minutiae pieces of glass, and then getting in the van and hearing her having her conversations on her phone, dealing with all this stuff, because she had just, sort of, her role had been expanded at the park there. She was overseeing more now, and how she goes from overseeing the minutia of this mural and these teeny little cut glass notes that she was giving, to the entire, like, Fantasyland park itself, and then, looking at the bigger picture of the entire park. And just the layers of perspective was fascinating for me to see how they could compartmentalize, think big picture and then think super small.
Yeah, because with Imagineers, I always think about, oh, they made Rise of the Resistance or something like the Matterhorn, but there's so many other little things that we experience, but we don't always think about consciously, which I think the show does a good job of exploring. And speaking of that, I know you were able to visit Star Wars Galaxy's Edge during its construction. So what was that experience like, given this is this new immersive land, especially with what we saw from Rise of the Resistance, this massive project, to be able to see that before it opened? What was that like for you?
That was really cool because you felt like, the entire world was so desperate to for this to finish and be done. And to be able to see it and get a tour by Scott Trowbridge and his team before it opened, during construction, and getting kind of the inside tour was really eye-opening. And I'm a Star Wars fan, and so I had interviewed these folks prior to seeing the land, and then getting to walk through it during construction was really a lot of fun. So I think that was kind of the cool part of this project, was that I had to hold a lot of secrets in my head and not tell anybody. And people were like, "What did you go shoot today?" I said, "Oh, inside Star Wars, you got Galaxy's Edge." And they said, "Well, how was it?" And I said, "I can't talk about it."
He said, "It was good. That's all I can say."
Cool. That's it.
One thing about just kind of taking a different take is that, you show some of these amazing things like Galaxy's Edge or Tokyo Disney Sea or everything. But one thing I found good about the series is that it's also pretty candid, where it talks about layoffs and things that didn't work so well, like DCA at first, or the Walt Disney Studios in Paris, or other examples. So how did you kind of strike that balance of showing these amazing things, but also reminding us that they're kind of people and they're working at a real company? Was that a challenge to kind of strike that balance between the two?
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, Imagineering is people. It's made of really talented, creative individuals who have a passion for creating happiness. And so I was always just thinking that this is a people story. It was less about how things are made, and I guess there's a lot about how things are made, but it was really more the human journey of innovation, and what were the challenges that people were posed with, and how did they solve them. So it really wasn't meant to be like a big technical story. It was more of a human story. And I guess going back to the idea that people visit these parks and, they enjoy them, they are enamored by the storytelling and the immersion and the creativity. But how do people come up with these ideas, and why? What's the backstory to all this? Why is there an Indiana Jones, ride there in Disneyland? Or why is there a Star Tours attraction there, and how did that happen? So it's really kind of the behind the scenes evolution of these of Walt deemed the happiest places on earth.
Definitely. Yeah. Because I think about the things that stick with me about it are Kevin Rafferty walking around cars, or Doris Woodward, like you mentioned, or Tony Baxter. There's stories beyond just the parks and everything, and plus so many others that we don't see as much. So when you went about kind of selecting who you wanted to talk with, obviously you have kind of the big names, but then you have others like David Snyder and Peggy Ferris and so many others. How did you narrow that at all in order to be able to not veer off? Because every one of them has such an interesting story.
Yeah, we kind of did a list early on of who were the key people behind different attractions and lands and key leads and whatnot. So you'd start to kind of, get a sense, but then you're also trying to balance between like the Bob Igers and Michael Eisners to the everyday people who were on the ground dealing with stuff. And so like David Snyder, for example, we had a breakfast meeting, and I thought it was going to be like an hour meeting, and it was like a 3-hour breakfast, because his conversations around change from analog to digital and all that, there was just real stories about how there was a lot of friction in technological change. And so, I felt like, okay, who are the people that are going to speak to those issues? And Carl Bongiorno, who was, the head of finance at the time, and, the struggles he had to go through to keep it alive. I never knew any of that. That was a great moment of illumination for me, was that they were thinking of getting WDI down to 20 people. And that was like the near-death experience for the studio. So everybody just kind of had different stories, and you had to sort of figure out which stories were the most compelling and actually, move the ball forward on the narrative.
That raises an interesting question too, because like you mentioned, David, just as one example of someone who has so many things that are interesting to say, would you ever consider doing either a future season that might focus more on individual Imagineers like a Joe Rohde, or like, even others that that aren't as well known, or even would you be interested in doing one about one particular person?
I mean, I'm always interested in telling stories of, telling great stories, I should put it that way. And so I think there's a lot of Imagineers that have interesting histories and backgrounds, and Joe Rohde being one of them. There's so many great, interesting people at Imagineering that I think a series on the individuals would be fantastic. And I think it's really just up to Disney Plus on what kinds of series they want to put out there. And if they're interested, then that would be something we would do. But, there is room for that. Let's just put it that way.
Oh, definitely. I would love to see it. So I'm curious for you. I mean, this was a long process. I mean, what really were some of your favorite moments or memories beyond what we've already discussed from working on the Imagineering story?
Well, it was just fun. I felt like there's a lot of projects that, you can take on as a filmmaker that are harder to do than others, that are darker in content or theme or environmental issues that, really make you mad, and you've got to do a film about it because you got to enlighten people about it, et cetera. But this was something that was like, okay, this is going to be my fun project. And I was just so happy that it lasted for as long as it did. And, we were constantly getting funding for more shoots, and, it was just an ongoing source of revenue, but it was a source of fun and camaraderie with the Imagineers. It's like a big family. And I do feel like a lot of these Imagineers are like family to me, and it was just great. And then, I was kind of, in any given month, I was in the editing room in our office, with the editors, and we're looking at new stuff, and new footage is coming in every week and on hard drives, and we're looking at it and making selects. And, the editors were just as excited as I was. They were so thrilled, and it felt like Christmas morning, whenever we'd get new material in, and that enthusiasm and joy that they felt editing it. And by the way, Mo Stobie, who is our editor for episode 1 and a number of all the other episodes, really, he had never been to Disneyland. So he edited this entire show without ever going to Disneyland.
Wow.
So I think that is a testament to great editing, because he could really find the unique nuggets that he thought was interesting, having never been there. So I find that very phenomenal. And so when the film was over, the series was released, we took him to Disneyland, and it was like taking my child to Disneyland or something for the first time. It's like, Mo, how does it feel? So it was really cute. And anyway, so then, you go from the editing room to the parks, and you'd be flying to Shanghai, and then you'd have a whole new cultural experience. And then you're, going into the park, and you're getting unique access, and you're talking to people and dropping in on their lives and seeing what they're working on, and talking to various Chinese Imagineers and what their lives are like. And so it was just all pretty cool, very fun.
Yeah, I think that sums it up so well, just what the show, because I feel like you said, it could be for someone like me that loves the parks or someone that is new to them. I think it really works. So Leslie, this has been great. Thank you so much for being on the show, and for creating the Imagineering Story, because it's an amazing series.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate talking to you.
If you enjoyed this episode, you should also check out my conversations with filmmakers like John Walker, producer of Tomorrowland, Tony Cortese, who did Walt Disney Master of Dreamers, Ken Kibo, who directed The Whimsical Imagineer about Rolly Crump, and so many others. And you can find those shows at tomorrowsociety.com. If you enjoy this show, I love ratings and reviews through Apple Podcasts or others. They make a huge difference in helping to spread the word about the show. Also, the Tomorrow Society podcast is a listener-supported show. If you'd like to help out, you can go to tomorrowsociety.com/member to see how you can do so through Patreon and a small monthly contribution. If you'd like to get a hold of me, shoot me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com. Follow me on Twitter @tomorrowsoc, or Facebook or Instagram at Tomorrow Society. The Tomorrow Society podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I will be talking with Michael Crawford, the author, blogger, podcaster. You know him under the Progress City USA moniker. We had a really fun conversation about Epcot, Horizons, and so much more. Thanks again for listening. I'll talk to you again very soon.